New Zealand is an island country in the southwestern Pacific Ocean and is geographically comprised of two main landmasses, the North Island and the South Island, with numerous smaller islands. The North and South Islands are separated by Cook Strait. 1,500 kilometres across the Tasman Sea to the east is Australia, and over 1,000 kilometres to the north are New Caledonia, Fiji and Tonga. Due to its remoteness, it was one of the last lands in the world to be settled by humans. 80 million years ago, New Zealand broke away from Gondwana, the southernmost of the two supercontinents, and after that existed in geographic isolation. Around 1250 to 1300 of the Common Era, the first Polynesians settled in New Zealand, where they developed a distinctive Maori culture of two tribes, the Iwi and Hapu. They lived a largely amiable existence, whereby they would cooperate, compete, occasionally intermarry, and, once in a while, even fight with each other. Then, in 1642, it all changed when the Europeans arrived. On that first day, there was a hostile encounter. 4 crew members were killed, and at least 1 Maori was shot dead. New Zealand then went through all the trials and tribulations associated with being so-called discovered. For then came the arrival of pioneers, missionaries, and rampant disease. Muskets seemed to be everywhere, followed by the wholesale taking of whales and seals and the decimation of the forests. Amid all the chaos, the Maori and Europeans traded food, tools and weapons for artifacts, water and even sex. Between 30,000 and 40,000 Maori died during the more than 600 battles between 1801 and 1840. The Maori named the North Island Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui, and Te Wai Punamu, the waters of greenstone, for the South Island. The Maori name for all of New Zealand was Aotearoa, translated as Land of the Long White Cloud. Dutch explorer Abel Tasman sighted New Zealand in 1642, and in 1645 Dutch cartographers renamed the land Nova Zeelandia. British explorer James Cook subsequently anglicised the name to New Zealand, which is what it is known as today. The town of Russell on the North Island was the first capital of New Zealand for a short 9 months before losing that title to Auckland. The Maori named this area Koro Rarakea, how sweet is the penguin, it means. But in the early 19th century, Russell was then a lawless trading centre where whalers, seafarers and merchants mixed with adventurers, deserted and escaped convicts from Australia. Today, Russell is a peaceful, picturesque township, quite contrary to its former reputation as the hellhole of the Pacific, and is back to being the sweet penguin. Land was purchased by the missionaries in 1834 for a church, with the agreement that Maori and Pakeha, Europeans, should have equal rights of burial there. A fundraising campaign was begun to raise money to build a church, and everybody contributed. Missionaries, settlers, traders, ship's captains, and even the officers of HMS Beagle during their short visit in 1835. The church, built in 1835, is the oldest existing church in New Zealand today, and possibly the oldest building still used for its original purpose. A book with Darwin's signature and a donation of 10 English pounds is on display in the church. We had heard that there were bullet holes in the walls of the church from some ecclesiastical skirmishes in the early days. In hopes of seeing the legendary bullet holes in Russell's Christ Church, we scanned the walls in search of them. They could not be found. Graves dating from 1836 include that of Tamati Wakanene, a chief responsible for the acceptance of the Treaty of Waitangi, Hannah King Lethbridge, the first European girl to be born in New Zealand, and the 6 men from HMS Hazard, who fell during the fighting for this land in the so-called New Zealand Wars. Russell is still a favourite spot for yachtsmen arriving or departing New Zealand. The Bay of Islands is the perfect place to watch the sailboats skimming over the bay, have a beer and lunch in a shady cafe, and later watch the sunset as it casts a golden hue over the evening. Whangarei is a popular destination for blue water cruisers seeking a safe harbour, most having ventured from the Americas and sailed across the vast Pacific Ocean. Whangarei basks in New Zealand's subtropical climate zone, with warm, humid summers and mild winters. Lying a few miles up the winding Hatea River, it provides the perfect conditions to safely dock a yacht, to perform yacht maintenance, and is a good base from which to see one of the world's most interesting countries. Wintersea and crew set out to do just that. Coinciding with the arrival of large numbers of cruisers in November, Whangarei prepares the fairgrounds for the annual summer show, uniting the countryside and the city in a colourful environment and friendly atmosphere. Llamas are led around like pets. Prize calves, pigs and ponies are paraded through the grounds. Prizes are handed out. Food is served. Exotic bunnies snuggle together waiting their turn to be placed on display. Sheep are sheared, and in the next stall, the ladies are spinning the wool to knit into luxurious sweaters. It is all busy and somewhat old-fashioned, leading to a sense of nostalgia. One feels taken back in time. Kawa Kawa, originally known as Irish Town, developed as a service centre when coal was found in the area in 1861. The old working railway track runs down the main street from Kawa Kawa's coal mining past, now converted into a tourist attraction. Soon after the coal mines closed, the natural vegetation took over and covered over the pits. Now long, rolling green hillsides are scattered with dots of sheep and cattle, for the economy has now shifted to farming. Kawa Kawa is home to the famous 100-Wasser public toilets, designed by the celebrated Austrian-born artist and architect, and is the last building he designed before he died. Golden orbs adorn this working work of art, with a grass-tufted roof atop a building of mosaic tiling, copper handwork, bottle glass windows, sculptures, cobblestone undulating floors, lopsided columns of recycled colourful materials, and topped with a living tree that has been integrated into the design. The architect 100-Wasser first visited in 1970, bought property on the Waikare Inlet and decided to make New Zealand his second home. 100-Wasser could never have dreamed of the effect he would have on this small rural community. He transformed Kawa Kawa from a sleepy hollow into a must-see mecca for 100-Wasser devotees worldwide. 100-Wasser spent his whole career in architecture championing the curves of organic nature against the straight line. The toilets were awarded the prestigious Golden Plunger Award in a worldwide search for the best public toilets. Who could have foreseen that a place of public ease and comfort would become a tourist attraction? 100-Wasser died in the year 2000 and is buried near Kawa Kawa in his Garden of the Happy Dead under a tulip tree. The ancient giant kauri trees of the Waipu forest are estimated to be 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and one has to tilt up one's head to look for the top of the extraordinary 167-foot-high Tane Muhuta, the local name given to this ancient tree with its amazing 45-foot trunk circumference. The Maori tribe lived in this forest region for hundreds of years, largely living on the still-to-be-seen kukupa, the native wood pigeon. Cape Reinga, where the Tasman Sea meets the Pacific, is at the northwestern tip of the Aupuri Peninsula of the North Island. The Maori meaning for Reinga is leaping off place of spirits, because the Maori believe that the Cape is the point where the spirits of the dead enter the underworld. According to mythology, the spirits of the dead travel to Cape Reinga on their journey to the afterlife to leap off the headland and descend to the underworld to return to their traditional homeland of Hawaii, using the Te Ara Wairua, the spirit's pathway. At this meeting place of two worlds, where these two mighty seas meet, they turn briefly at the Three Kings Islands for one last look back towards the land, then continue on their journey. Eerie and unforgettable, magical and entrancing Cape Reinga thrusts its gritty head north to bask in subtropical sunlight, bathed in wild waves and spitting salty spray. The wind-whipped Cape Reinga lighthouse has been guiding sailors for over 100 years, standing 160 meters above sea level, and it can be seen for over 28 miles. 2,000 years ago, the Coromandel Peninsula was covered in luxuriant forests, with groves of enormous trees and thick undergrowth right to the water's edge. Then, a relatively short time later, the peninsula was mostly bare earth. The forest had been almost clear-cut for the timber and to give easy access to the kauri gum and gold, which helped satisfy the early settlers' desperate need for trade and commerce. Gold, discovered at Driving Creek in 1852 by the Ring brothers, produced over 71,000 ounces of gold in a 50-year period from the Kapanga mine. For 2 hours on either side of low tide, Coromandel's hot water beach bubbles with naturally heated hot mineral water that flows from the interior of the earth to surface in the Pacific Ocean through the golden sand. The town of Thames, situated between the calm waters of the Firth of Thames and the majestic low mountain ranges of the Coromandel Peninsula, was once a rowdy boom town, but is now a dusty, sleepy hollow with a laid-back 1960s feel to it. The town grew out of the gold rush of 1867, after which it had a population that reached over 18,000. Now it has shrunk to less than 7,000 people. In 1875, George Vesey Stewart brought the first party of Irish settlers to Katikati, the only planned Ulster settlement in the world. 34 Northern Irish families cleared the land, planted crops and built their homes. The second party arrived in 1878, making a total of over 600 settlers. In 1990, at a time when Katikati was facing an economic downturn, a group of volunteers decided to lift the spirits of the local community and to attract visitors by painting Katikati's unique history on the walls of their town. Now these colourful pictures share a piece of the past for the people of today and tomorrow. At the heart of the Hukutaya domain stands a historic puriri tree named Takatakarau, and was once an ancient Maori burial tree. This puriri tree, 22 metres around, 23 metres high, is over 2,000 years old. Hollow burial trees were used by the Maori as the last resting place for the bodies of important people. The name Opotiki dates back to the migration of people from Hawaii as early as the 11th century of the Common Era. In the 1820s, the sea literally ran red with blood when Ngati Maru invaders from Hauraki, armed with firearms, inflicted heavy losses on the local Wakatea people. Before the arrival of Europeans, Opotiki was a populous Maori centre with a very large village stretching along the riverbanks. As in most places of New Zealand, by the middle of the 19th century, the immigrant people outnumbered the Maoris by a considerable margin. On the 3rd of February 1931, most of the city of Napier was levelled by an enormous earthquake. 256 people were killed and 40 square kilometres of the seabed became dry land. The town of Napier was virtually wiped off the map. Soon, almost all the buildings were rebuilt in the Art Deco style, which was popular worldwide at that time. This makes a visit to Napier a joy for lovers of architecture. In January 1945, a German Kriegsmarine U-boat entered and departed from the port of Napier undetected. This event became the basis of a widely circulated post-war tall tale that the captain of this U-boat, Heinrich Timm, had led crewmen ashore near Napier to milk cows in order to supplement their meagre rations. The Maori name for Gisborne was Turanga Nui Akiwa, the place where Kiwa stood. It was later named after an early British colonial minister, William Gisborne. Poverty Bay is where the first Maori arrived around 1350 AD and is also the site where Cook first set foot on New Zealand soil and where the first significant meeting between Maori and Europeans took place. Local Maori were mystified by what they saw, for they thought the ship Endeavour was an enormous bird with wings of great size and beauty. The longboats were smaller birds, while Cook and his men were atua, or gods. Cook's arrival on the 8th of October 1769 on the HMS Endeavour would change the course of New Zealand history forever. Cook was eager to make friendly contact with the Maori people. However, a series of unfortunate encounters, both on the day of the landing and the next day, resulted in the deaths of several Maori. For Cook, the initial exploration of the east coast of New Zealand was cause for celebration, but for the Maori people, it was a time of astonishment and fear. Cook names the bay Poverty Bay because it afforded us not one thing that we wanted. A memorial to Cook stands on the foreshore, marking the point where he first stepped ashore in New Zealand. Located at the north end of Poverty Bay, opposite the White Cliff Headland, is Young Nick's Head, named after the crew member who first saw it, Cook's smallest crew member, Young Nick. Gisborne has the smallest population of any region on the North Island and has, over the past 20 years, implemented soil conservation measures with significant reforestation occurring. It is also sometimes known as the City of Rivers, as at the centre of the city 3 different rivers meet. It is the first city in the world to greet the sun each morning and is statistically one of the sunniest places in New Zealand. Miles of untouched, pristine beaches edge the town, largely deserted, and it's a surfer's paradise. New Zealand's east coast is astonishingly beautiful, with scenery ranging from rocky shores to pristine white sandy beaches and stunning coastal cliff walks. Abbey Caves Reserve is 18.7 hectares in area and is comprised of 3 large and significant caves, naturally sculptured limestone outcrops, bluffs, enclosed depressions and sinkholes. The reserve has 2 distinct areas of native bush with beautiful mature puriri trees and a well-established podocarp hardwood forest, a lineage that stretches back to the time when New Zealand was part of the super southern continent of Gondwana. Arrowed signs are strategically placed to lead the adventurer down a beaten path in a grassy hillside. Cattle lazily graze nearby, looking quite puzzled at the visitors who appear over the horizon, walk by, and are never to be seen again. The landscape is littered with huge boulders and tiny stones. Caves form from limestone and marble sediment as rainwater leaches through the soil, releasing carbonic acid through cracks in the limestone and enlarging them. The compressing, leaching and dripping creates a hidden world full of caves, sinkholes and shafts, stalactites, stalagmites, waterfalls and glowworms. A stalactite, named from the Greek word to drip, is an icicle-shaped mass of calcium carbonate attached to the roof of a limestone cave. By repetition of this process, the length and thickness of the stalactite is increased. A stalagmite, meaning a drop, is a cone of calcium carbonate rising from the floor of a cave. Stalagmites and stalactites are frequently found in pairs and often meet each other to form solid pillars or columns. The sound of flowing water can be heard echoing from Ivy Cave and Middle Cave as the underground stream runs through the musky corridor. The ceiling is rough, the walls are jagged, the soil is humid, and cave plants grow from outcrops. Cameras simply cannot capture the magical false sky of apparent constellations of stars that one finds in the cave ceilings. Blue, yellow and white pinpricks come from glowworms, illuminating the ceilings and the walls, fighting for survival against the harvestman spiders. There are large eels, whose ancestors date back 1 million years, slithering through the streams, and moisture-loving insects flit about everywhere. The entrance to the organ cave has shifted, but we entered anyway. This is the largest of the caves where, in the main chamber, are large overhanging stalactites, which look similar to church organ pipes. This cave has the deepest water and is reported to have an impressive waterfall at its head. As the water got deeper and deeper, we decided not to go that far. Instead, we gazed at the sticky mesh of the glowworm lines as they glisten in the light overhead like cobwebs, waiting to snag some unsuspecting insect for dinner. Around the year 1860, high up on the hill near Abbey Caves, Nathaniel and Amelia Clotworthy settled on 409 acres. Their house was built in the limestone outcrops that resembled an Irish abbey, giving rise to the name. This house unfortunately burned down in 1920, but the site is still marked by chimney remains and some datura trees. A grave of one of the Clotworthy children, dating from 1884, lies nearby. Thermal activity deep down below the ground is at the heart of the spectacular wonders of Rotorua, with geysers, bubbling mud pools, hot thermal springs, the pungent smell of sulfur in the air, and the buried village of Te Wairoa, covered from Mount Tarawera's eruption in 1886. While O Tapu, Maori for sacred waters, is New Zealand's most colourful geothermal wonderland, covering 18 square kilometres. Prior to European occupation, the area was the homeland of the Ngati Waua tribe, who had descended in direct line from those original immigrants who had come in the great canoes from Hawaii Iki. The Lady Knox Geyser, named after Lady Constance Knox, daughter of the 15th Governor of New Zealand, was discovered in 1901 when the first open prison in New Zealand was established at Waiotapu. In what was thought to be simply a hot water pond and flowing stream, the prisoners began to wash their clothes. This, for the prisoners, was a great luxury in this wilderness. To their astonishment, within a couple of minutes, the pool erupted, sending their laundry skyward amid scalding hot water. They scattered for cover, not knowing that it was the washing soap they had used which changed the qualities of the water leading to the eruption. The geyser is still induced to erupt, now for the sake of tourists, like clockwork, at precisely 10:30 each day by dropping a surfactant or foaming agent into the opening of the vent. Eruptions produce a jet of water reaching up 20 meters and can blow for an hour or more. A mud pool is a type of acidic hot spring, or fumarole as it is called, in which acids and microorganisms decompose surrounding rocks into clay and mud, creating a bubbling, popping slurry. Gases like carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, are ever-present threats in geothermal areas. These ground-hugging gases, heavier than air, can accumulate to dangerous concentrations. Rotorua has seen a number of deaths due to hydrogen sulfide poisoning. The most common death traps are excavations in geothermal ground and poorly ventilated bathing pools. The area is shaped from collapsed craters with various pools that have been named according to visual display, personal risk, or possible demise. Devil's Hole, Rainbow Crater, Devil's Inkpot, Artist's Palette, Opal Pool and Frying Pan Flat, Oyster Pool, Champagne Pool and Devil's Bath are but a few names. The bright colours at Champagne Pool are caused by trace amounts of arsenic and antimony. These chemicals are extracted from the water by sulfur precipitating in the pool. The ridges around the pool are composed of sinter, which is fine-grained silica sand. The pool and its margins are teeming with microbial life that is growing in water temperatures of 75 degrees Celsius. These hot springs provide some of the best glimpses into early Earth and its physical structure, leading scientists to believe that life may have begun roughly 3 billion years ago in high-temperature environments, and that the first organisms might therefore have been thermophiles or heat-compatible life forms. The Champagne Pool is lovely, almost romantic, for the watery mud bubbles, much like a bubbly glass of champagne, from which the pool gets its name. This pool came into being only 900 years ago as a result of an enormous explosion of mud and steam from below the surface. Enticing people for over 700 years, this steamy pool bubbles away at a mere 74 degrees Celsius. It's 70 meters deep and 65 meters across, with the captivating yellow, green and orange colors of arsenic and sulfide deposits. Waiotapu is a sacred Maori area that displays geysers, boiling mud pots, caverns, multicolored ponds and lakes in an area that is bubbling and boiling with thermal activity, seeming always on the edge of a volcano erupting. Maori lived here from their earliest days of settlement, using the boiling springs, ungawa, for cooking, and warm pools, waiariki, for bathing, laundry and relaxation. Some mud pools were found to have medicinal properties, and vividly coloured clays, such as red ochre, were used for paints and dyes. Geysers, puia, were treated with great caution, yet accidents still occurred. For Henry S. Bates, visiting in 1860, recorded in his diary that a Maori child had fallen into a nearby hot pool and geyser and died. At Waiotapu thermal area, there are more than 20 eruption craters with radiocarbon indicators dating that these were formed 700 to 800 years ago. Wakaari, or White Island, approximately 150,000 years old, is an active volcanic rock stratovolcano situated in the Bay of Plenty. The island, roughly circular, is about 2 kilometers in diameter. It rises to a height of 321 meters above sea level and is part of the Taupo volcanic zone. Captain Cook named it White Island in 1769. For he only saw a large white cloud, not realizing that it was steam derived from volcanic activity. Major eruptions in 1981 and 1983 altered much of the island's landscape and decimated the extensive Pahuka Takawa forest, full of what were nicknamed New Zealand Christmas trees. Then, in March 2000, 3 small vents appeared in the main crater and began belching ash, which covered the island in fine grey powder. An eruption on the 27th of July 2000 blanketed the island with mud and scoria, which is a porous, virtually weightless volcanic rock, and a new crater appeared that now contains a lake whose level varies substantially. White Island, located 48 kilometers off the shores of Wakatani, is one of the world's few accessible live volcanoes. Constant plumes of steam arise from the crater of this continuously active volcano, where sulfur-lipped fumaroles and roaring steam vents create a stark wonderland amidst the mud and ash-soaked landscape of yellow and white sulfur crystal formations. A river of yellow sulfur flows from the lake of brilliantly green, hot, steaming sulfuric acid, oozing from the island's depths to offer an unforgettable insight into nature's creativity. Sulfur fumes and the acidic environment ensure that very little vegetation exists. Most recently, in August 2012, a lava dome 30 meters across formed with spikes of yellows and reds, suggesting that the erupting lava had been highly altered by hydrothermal gases. It began on the 5th of August with a steam plume that rose from the crater, followed by volcanic tremors 2 days later. Within hours, the colour of the plume changed from white to light brown, indicating more ash in the plume. The island sits on one of the most active plate boundaries in the world, where the Pacific Plate is dragged beneath the Indo-Australian Plate, formed by the fusion of Indian and Australian plates 43 million years ago, producing enough heat to melt the rocks and feed the volcano. Sulfur mining was attempted but abandoned in September 1914 when part of the western crater rim collapsed, creating a debris avalanche and lahar flow, killing all 10 workers. Lahars have the consistency, viscosity and approximate density of concrete, fluid when moving, solid at rest. The labourers disappeared without trace. Only a camp cat survived, for he was found some days afterwards by the resupply ship and dubbed Peter the Great. Mining resumed again in 1923, and learning from the 1914 disaster, the miners built their huts high on a flat part of the island. In the early days, sulfur was in high demand as an antibacterial agent in medicines, in the making of match heads and for sterilizing wine corks. A total of 11,000 tons had been obtained over the years from White Island. Eventually, by 1930, the mines were closed here because the sulfur supply simply was not adequate. The remains of the buildings are now much corroded by acidic sulfuric gases that fill the air. Maori have legends about the creation of everything, including White Island, or Waka A'ari, as it was called. Without a written language, the Maori shared these legends through songs with complex collections of chants. Wanganui district was first settled by the Maori, who were attracted to the Wanganui River, its sheltered fertile valley and abundant food supply. Today, the town of Wanganui stretches along both sides of the river, putting behind it its mixed past of wars with coastal tribes, troubled negotiations with Europeans and Maori over land deals, with haphazard and irregular agreements, followed by egregious missionaries collecting signatures for the Treaty of Waitangi. The town became a military centre during the land wars of 1860. Pastures were cleared and agriculture went on, but resentment of those days still filters through to the present. But perhaps the city's biggest scandal happened in 1920, when the mayor, Charles Mackay, shot and wounded a young poet, Darcy Cresswell, who had been blackmailing him over his homosexuality. The town's name means Big Harbour. It was once the centre of industrial transport, but has little sea traffic today. Nowadays, tourism gives the biggest boost to the economy. The South Island is the largest part of New Zealand's landmass and is divided along its length by the Southern Alps, with 18 peaks over 3,000 metres, the highest of which is Mount Cook at 3,750 metres. Over the past 100,000 years, glaciers ground away at the rocks, which were threaded with quartz veins containing gold, and rivers washed and sorted the gravels of the Otago valleys, placing New Zealand on the 19th century gold mining map. Steep mountains and deep fjords record Fiordland's extensive Ice Age glaciation. Mount Ruapehu Plateau hosts Lake Taupo, the country's largest lake, nestled in the cauldron-like volcanic basin of one of the world's most active supervolcanoes. Because of immense geographic and weather processes, there are many gorges and fjords on the South Island of New Zealand. Tectonic activity is constant, and earthquakes are a fact of life. New Zealand's South Island is a palette of dramatic scenes, of rolling hillsides and vineyards, mountains and glaciers, providing the purest of natural landscapes, dotted with sheep. British navigator James Cook brought sheep to New Zealand in 1773 and again in 1777. New Zealand today has almost 40 million sheep, 10 for each person. Sheep farming has been crucial in the development of the economy, and for 130 years was, and probably still is, the most important agricultural industry. Prior to the Maori arrival, New Zealand was almost entirely forested, except for high alpine regions and those areas affected by volcanoes. By the time of the Europeans' arrival, 50% of the original forest cover had been removed. By the 20th century, 14 million of the 27 million hectares of standing timber had been cut down. Queenstown's Lake Wakatipu's long, thin Z-shape was formed by glacial processes, creating a stunning setting between lake and mountains. In early days, Maori often visited Queenstown on their quest for greenstone, a gemstone with a long history of being used and revered by the first Maori inhabitants, who fulfilled an ancient prophecy by travelling over the seas to find the Godstone, as it was known then, to shape into tools, weapons and jewellery. Queenstown is surrounded by the jagged, sawtooth, snow-capped Southern Alps and lies on the edge of the Fiordland and Lake Te Anau, with an array of volcanic lakes, ancient forests, greenstone rivers, blue ice glaciers and wide alluvial valleys. The town felt the boom and bust of gold mining and has now settled into a world-class tourist centre for those seeking history and culture, as well as seasonal travellers, sunbathers in the summer and skiers in the winter. New Zealand's Southland district offers breathtaking views of daunting peaks and wind-swept glacial mountain ranges, a wetter climate and cooler temperatures that are the perfect environment for the kea parrot, often called the clown of the mountains. These birds are very clown-like, for they will, full of curiosity, investigate backpacks and peek in car windows and dance around people shrieking loudly. The mountainous peaks at Lake Te Anau provide a thunderous roar from the water that gushes from the many waterfalls that fall down their sides. There is very high rainfall here. The vegetation is sparse in the harsh alpine highlands, yet below the tree line the landscape is rich in flora and fauna. Stuart Landsborough's puzzling world began with a piece of barren land on the outskirts of Wanaka, an inventive idea and a single-level wooden maze. It has now grown and evolved into a widely puzzling experience. North of Queenstown and Fiordland is Punakaki, or Pancake Rocks, formed 30 million years ago from minute fragments of dead marine creatures and plants that landed on the seabed about 2 kilometers below the surface, then overlaid by weaker layers of soft mud and clay. Immense water pressure caused the fragments to solidify in alternately hard and soft layers. Gradually, seismic action lifted the limestone above the seabed to form the coastal cliffs and coastline. Mildly acidic rain, wind and seawater sculpted the bizarre shapes, etching out the soft layers to form the unusual rock formations of varying densities, giving the appearance of gigantic stacks of pancakes on the shoreline, together with a labyrinth of caves and surge channels. In the heart of Mackenzie country is Lake Tekapo. its name derived from Maori words taka for sleeping mat and po for night, giving it the meaning night mat, likely accredited to the country's characteristic open grasslands, consisting mainly of golden tussocks dotted with scattered exotic trees. The surrounding mountain slopes are covered with native beech forests and the occasional alpine plants. The nature of the climate here is harsh, alternating between hot, dry summers and cold, frosty winters. Across it all blow the hot, dry norwesterly winds that dictate as much as the stormy cold that the vegetation of the Mackenzie region is hardy and drought-resistant. Lake Takapo in summer is surrounded by several hectares of Russell lupins in attractive shades of whites, pinks and purples. It was said that a few lupin seeds were scattered by an early run holder's wife who wanted more colour in this barren land. It should be pointed out that a run holder is a sheep farmer on Crown leased land. Here, as in all of New Zealand, there was a rich abundance of bird life before the arrival of first the Maori and later the Europeans. The hunting for food and the introduction of exotic mammals such as cats, stoats, ferrets and weasels has drastically reduced their numbers and variety. Nevertheless, a number of rare and protected birds such as kea, the New Zealand falcon, rock wrens, black stilts, wrybills and black-fronted terns can still be found by a keen birdwatcher. Lake Tekapo sits at the edge of a glacial field, completely surrounded by mountains and a vast basin of golden tussock grass. The landscape is outstanding, sculpted by successive Ice Age glaciers, the remnants of which continue to discharge fine rock flour, giving the lake its intense turquoise hue. The sky is huge and of extraordinary clarity, making Lake Tekapo one of the world's best locations to probe the heavens from the observatories atop Mount John, which have clear views of the skies and, also, 360-degree views of the uplands, lakes and mountains that make the climb up there well worth the effort. Mackenzie District is named after James Mackenzie, a Scottish-born immigrant whose short stay in New Zealand left an indelible mark on the country. Mackenzie immigrated to Australia in 1849, purchased a team of bullocks for carrying goods to the gold diggings, saved £1,000 and moved to Nelson in New Zealand. He later moved to Otago, where he applied for a land grant. In March 1855, Mackenzie was caught stealing 1,000 sheep from Levels Station, north of Timaru. Escaping his accusers, he walked 160 kilometres before being caught by the police. After being found guilty by a Littleton Supreme Court jury in April 1855, he was subsequently sentenced to 5 years hard labour. He escaped from prison on at least 2 occasions, in May and June 1855, with neither escape lasting more than 3 days, after which he was placed in irons and closely watched. In September 1855, the Christchurch resident magistrate investigated the enterprising Mackenzie's case and found serious flaws in the police inquiry and trial. Mackenzie was given an unconditional pardon on the 11th of January 1856 after spending only 9 months in prison. Once freed, Mackenzie sailed for Australia, and there the story ends, for nothing more is known of his later life. James Mackenzie was easily recognised, for he was a large man with red hair and a bushy red beard. He was described as a raw-boned Highlander, as rough as you make them, a regular barbarian. He had many aliases and was known to be referred to as James or John or Jock. The legends of James Mackenzie and his faithful dog Friday grew to disproportionate size, with the actual facts being romanticised in print and in song. Situated on the shores of Lake Tekapo, amid a stunning landscape, is the small stone church of the Good Shepherd, which, in 1835, was the first church to be built in the Mackenzie Basin, a joint venture for pioneering families. The church at Lake Tekapo is based on sketches by local artist Esther Hope and was designed to Christchurch architect R.S.D. Harmon's medieval plan appropriate for the bleak, stark landscape. Flying buttresses line the sides of the church, and a small belfry rises from the roofline to the left of the main entrance. A concrete cross was placed on top of the north gable. Although the church was originally roofed with Australian oak shingles, these proved unable to stand up to the extreme weather conditions and were replaced with slate in 1957. A local sheepdog named Haig modelled for sculptor Innes Elliott for the well-known bronze statue of a New Zealand collie sheepdog, which was mounted above Lake Tekapo on March 7, 1968, in recognition of the indispensable role of the sheepdog in the livelihood of this region. Scottish shepherds came to the East and South Island during the 19th century, bringing with them their clever sheepdogs. Koikoe Beach on the North Otago coast is covered with the unusually large and spherical Moaraki boulders, having been exhumed from the hillside by coastal erosion. Most are spherical, while some are slightly elongated, shaped by the bed of the mudstone that once enclosed them. These hundreds of calcium carbonate spheres, which rolled from the hillside and down into the water, range in size from small nodules to giant balls over 4 meters in diameter. Each is the result of slow growth over millions of years around a small nucleus. The spheres are concretions, the result of tiny amounts of mineral precipitation of soft mudstone that was raised from the seabed around 15 million years ago. New Zealand has been shaped by the forces of nature over millions of years, creating an intensely varied landscape, and has supported a variety of people for hundreds of years, from the early Maori to the much more recent Europeans. Early immigrants came in their longboats and canoes to this land of the long white cloud to make a new home, and later early Europeans arrived in their tall ships, also searching for a new place to settle and a better life. Though their journey from Europe was long and difficult, they came prepared for hard work, with stamina and determination to build a better life. Now people come from far and wide to swim in the sea, climb a mountain, or sail in the sea and lakes. There are artists and craftspeople to rival any in the world. This land of the Kiwis is where one slips back a little in time. It is a world of legends and myths that are passed down through music and song. It is a place where one can visit a church of shared faith or enjoy a view over the scenic valley, maybe both at the same time, or visit the painted town with murals so realistic that one can almost hear the laughter of children or the pioneers at their work. One can be surrounded by lupins, so brilliant in colour, before a backdrop of mountains filled with beauty, tranquility and harmony. There are mountain tops shaped by glaciation to shorelines washed by the soft, lapping Pacific and the rugged, magical and unbelievable Cape Reinga, where its tip reaches northward to the tropics like a dragon taking to the sea. But no less captivating is the concealed world of caves with rivers and an underground life of its own, where ancient seabeds have been brought to the surface and where silence is broken by only the constant drips forming stalactites and stalagmites. A world of New Zealand's unique cave plants and glowworms. But even more intriguing is New Zealand's volcanic wonderland, that dates back to before the Zealandia microcontinent drifted away from Gondwana between 60 and 130 million years ago. New Zealand's geothermal marvels attract thousands of visitors every year. In Rotorua, locally known as Fartopolis, the air is pungent with the smell of sulfur, but this putrid smell does not deter visitors. It perhaps adds to the excitement of being able to walk over land that could erupt at any given moment. for New Zealand lies amid the potential volcanic disturbances of the Pacific Ring of Fire. A most extraordinary country, New Zealand.